This is a Rabble Podcast Network show. New voices in your head. It's Radio Free Radio.
Hey everybody, and welcome to episode number 4 of the Ruckus right here on the Rabble Podcast Network. As always, I'm Kevin McGowan, and I'm here to guide you through our episode. This time, we're focusing on jazz. Now, anybody who knows much about jazz at all knows that there's a wide variety of styles and influences and sounds, so we're going to sample a few different things in the Canadian jazz world today. We are going to speak, as promised from last time, we're going to speak with Barry Romberg. He's a drummer, very active, very interesting guy from Toronto. Also, speaking of interesting, we're going to be heading off to Montreal to chat with Kids Eat Crayons. These guys blend some really crazy stuff. It's jazz, it's heavy metal, it's everything in between, but really comes out groovy. Also, we're going to go way back in time to Edmonton in the early 1960s, and I'll explain a little bit more of that later, but it's going to be some classic Dixieland-style jazz. To start off, though, this month we are going to start with Doug Richardson. Unfortunately, Dougie passed away just a couple of years ago, but he was a mean saxophone player. I had the pleasure of speaking with his friend and producer, Ron Clark, recently, and he sent me a copy of Dougie's second and last CD, just self-titled. Very good stuff. If you don't know Dougie Richardson, he worked with everybody, man. He worked with Bill Cosby, with Bernie Mac. He was like a music consultant with them. He was a sideman for any number of bands, and I think he recorded several hundred records with anybody. I mean, the guy was just all over the place. If you have any kind of extensive jazz collection at home, I dare you to flip through it, and no doubt you will find Dougie Richardson somewhere playing saxophone. But this is from his last album. This is a great track. I heard it, I mean, it kind of made me giggle a little bit. It's just a lot of fun. It's called Over Easy, and I'm assuming that's one of the ways Dougie liked his eggs. Let's start it off with Doug Richardson.
soft boil, hard boil, sunny side up, fried egg, devil, stuffed, quiche Lorraine, souffle, okay? Eggs Benedict, over easy, make it breezy.
And that was Over Easy by Dougie Richardson. I just love that track, and it's a really great record, actually. If you're interested in finding a copy, I don't know where you can find it, to be honest with you. I think they sold it mostly just at gigs, but if you're really interested in Dougie Richardson and hearing more music, let me know, and I can probably dig up another copy for you. Just drop me an email, go to CanadianRuckus.com, and click on the link to email me, and I'll see what I can do for you. Next on the show, we are going to be talking with Barry Romberg. Well, when I say we, I certainly don't mean me, because our new correspondent, Natalie Salat, is going to be chatting with them. So, Natalie.
Yes, Kevin.
Welcome to the Ruckus, your first episode.
I know, how exciting.
Isn't this cool?
This is very cool.
Good. So you had a great chat with Mr. Barry Romberg.
Yes, indeed. He's one of Canada's most innovative, hardworking, and prolific jazz musicians. He's recorded extensively with a number of groups. He, in fact, won a Juno in 1991, and he's played with a number of international names, including Gil Evans.
Really?
Yes, he has. And he now has a new album out with his latest group, which is the Random Access Large Ensemble, and it's called Existential Detective. And it's an album that certainly reflects his reputation as an innovative jazz musician.
Well, what was your take on him? I mean, you chatted with him for a while. I mean, obviously, he sounded like a pretty pleasant individual. But I mean, what kind of character is he?
Well, he's very passionate about his music, and well, of course, an amiable guy, and certainly very involved in the jazz music scene, which, you know, he's trying to get the jazz music scene more alive and happening in Canada. Unfortunately, it's quite a small scene, but he and his various groups are doing everything they can to drum up some interest, if I may pun. That was bad.
Well, all right. Thank you very much, Natalie, for chatting with Mr. Romberg.
It was my pleasure.
And for our listeners on their iPods and on their computers, this is Natalie speaking with Mr. Barry Romberg.
how did you get from first picking up a set of drumsticks to this point?
Well, you know what they say, the turtle wins the race. It's been a long time. I've been involved in this since I first played the drums, we're talking about 40 years.
Right. And what made you pick up a set of drumsticks?
I don't know. I was always drawn to music as a young lad. It was obvious that music was going to play a role in my life. I don't know. When I was around 10 years old, I took a couple guitar lessons, and I think because I'm inherently lazy, I figured maybe I'll play the drums.
Your new album, Existential Detective, involves your original 7-piece electric group, Random Access, plus 8 horns coming together. How did the album come about?
Well, I have a home studio, and I've always, ever since I was young, in my 20s, I've always had an interest in, sort of the recording process and what you can do in an experimental fashion in the studio. Sort of like, I like to say I've been influenced by Glenn Gould, who in his later life stopped performing at the peak of his career and just lived in the hotel room there in on the park and played with the tape recorders. And then in 2005, I put a band together just for the purpose of having a CD release party, to promote the record. And the band was so much fun that I thought, okay, this is something we should pursue. And we did, and recorded 4 CDs and did a couple of tours. And that's the band that won the Best Electric Band last year at the National Jazz Awards.
That's the 7-piece, right?
That's the 7-piece. And then I had this cockamamie idea about almost 2 years ago to try and capture the looseness aspect of the group in a larger format. So we added 8 horns, and we've been pretty lucky. I've been lucky to get a lot of funding from the federal government, and we did the new record, and we've sort of been holding court at the Rex Hotel in Toronto over the past couple of years. We play the last Sunday of every month. The big band is it's very complicated.
Yeah, well, it was interesting to me that, in listening to it and in the liner notes, you wrote that in the beginning there was now no structure and now there is much.
Right.
That's the way it crumbles cookie-wise. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
There's a guy that I've worked with a lot over the years. His name is Hugh Marsh. He's probably one of the heaviest musicians I've ever worked with. He plays violin. Used to play with Bruce Coburn a lot. He's done a lot of eclectic gigs. But we were on the road, I think it was in 2001, with Michael Acapinti's band. We had a gig in Halifax. We were just going to play duet, and we met this cello player that was out there. His name was Rufus Cappadocia, and we did this trio gig, just violin, electric cello, and drums. And it was quite magical. So again, I thought, okay, here's something we want to pursue. So we recorded a couple CDs and did a Canadian tour, and the whole time that we were a group, we never once talked about anything we would play. It was completely improvised.
Right.
But it didn't really sound that way. It's not like, I look at it as free music, but it's not free music in the sense of what people are used to when they say free music, because there's a big part of what I love is the groove element. And so, anyways, the whole thing was basically we wouldn't talk about anything we would play. We just would play, relate to one another in a musical way. And then what I did was the Random Access thing was kind of extension of that. I wanted to keep the same impetus, but expand the palette to a larger format. So the band became 7 guys with, it was me and Hugh and Rich Brown on bass and Jeff Young on guitar, Blair Mackay on percussion, and 2 horns, Kevin Turcotte and Kelly Jefferson. That was so we essentially tried to play free, meaning we just would play. Although my concept at that time was to write out tunes with no pitches, so there'd be some kind of rhythmic structure.
Okay.
But there'd be no notes, so the guys would pick their own notes. So that was sort of the basis of the group. So some of the stuff we play would be completely improvised. Some stuff would be based off the rhythmic structure. that I would paint out. And then when we started with the big band, I realized you can't have 15 guys playing with no notes.
Yeah.
Because that's going to be a recipe for disaster. So I was lucky enough to have a couple of the guys, David Occupanti, Jeff Young, and Jason Logue, wrote some really cool stuff for us to play. Some of them were, David arranged a couple of my tunes, so did Jeff, and Jeff wrote a couple of original things, and so did Jason. And some of the stuff, like some of Jason's tunes were, surprisingly enough, a couple of them are based where the guys get to pick their own pitches, and it works surprisingly well. In fact, the first tune on the new record is that. It sort of has a bluesy kind of flavor, but the notes are not determined.
Are there any rules of improvisation?
Well, I wouldn't say there's any. Well, I mean, I don't know. It's like fractals, like the more you think things are random, when you break them down, you realize that there's some structure to the randomness somehow. So certainly with the big band, I mean, there are parts where we'll be playing free to some degree, but there's always a point where part of the tune or the structure, the form will pull us back in.
Can I ask you what the influences were? You seem to meld a few styles in there, such as funk, and even I thought I could detect some Hendrix and Davis. And
yeah, people ask me that a lot. I've probably been influenced by everything I've ever heard, but certainly the reviewers over the past years with the Random Access always draw an analogy to Miles. I guess if anytime you have any kind of electric groove or anything electric and there's a trumpet, they automatically, they say, oh, that's
must be
Miles Davis. I mean, yeah, certainly Miles's bands and himself, and he's probably one of the greatest leaders in all of modern jazz music, and he was on the cutting edge every decade. Yeah, certainly I grew up playing rock and roll, so Led Zeppelin, Hendrix, Cream, Coltrane.
Yeah.
Weather Report is also a big influence on me. So, those things probably stand out.
Why did you call the album Existential Detective?
Well, I'm all about the titles.
I know, I can get that from, some of them are really quite creative and whimsical.
Yeah, I don't know. I always joke with people. I say, ladies and gentlemen, this is not a comedy record. Because like the last few records, that one's the new one's called Existential Detective. The one before that was Big Giant Head, and then Accidental Beef and No Soap Radio. It's like, I don't know. Actually, I stole that. Right, that's from the Huckabees.
Oh yeah,
that's
the movie right. I Heart Huckabee.
Yeah, that's a direct steal from. I just thought it was a cool title, and I've done my share of reading philosophy. So.
Mm-hmm. And one more question: do you prefer, studio playing, or do you prefer playing live in front of an audience?
Well, I like both. I mean, there's something, jazz music's all about the communication between the guys in the group, and I think, playing live in a small club is what jazz music's all about. On the other hand, that's why I kind of started the whole business with the experimental studio stuff, because I've been in a lot of sessions where, guys have a voice, they write a bunch of original music, and you go in and you record it. Not that I haven't done that. Of course, I've done that, and I continue to do that with other people. But I like to look at the studio environment as a completely separate animal from live playing. Because, you can do stuff in the studio that you can't do live. Some people would disagree in terms of like the more traditionalists that think more of what I mentioned before in terms of like, you write your music and then you record it. And so it's basically a live thing, but you're doing it in the studio.
Yeah.
Like I said a while back, that I let the process of recording dictate where the compositional outcome's going to take it. I might have a vague idea of something that I want to experiment with in terms of maybe a melodic line or some kind of rhythmic concept.
Right.
Or sometimes it's just a complete free improvisation that Random Access Part 3, the record, was done, most of it was done as a duet between me and Hugh Marsh, the violinist. Huh. We played all day. I recorded every note we played, and then what I do is I go through it and I basically throw out what I think is not good, and then I sort of, cut and paste some of the stuff that we've done, and then I have other people come over and overdub, and I like the results. I guess, part of my background is pop music or, rock and roll, so I don't look at it in a traditionalist fashion. I just, it's kind of like throwing stuff at a wall and you see what sticks,
And that, of course, was Barry Romberg, chatting with our very own Natalie Salat. If you would like some more information on Barry, make sure you check out barryromberg.com. He's always got it updated with all the projects he's working on and shows that he's got coming up. Next on the Ruckus, we're going to go back in time. Now, a lot of you probably are already familiar because I've talked about it on the show before. My other web project is called itcamefromcanada.com. And now I work on that archive with my friend Bo Levitt. And on that website, again, it's itcamefromcanada.com. I have to plug it as often as I can. We feature a whole lot of old, long-lost Canadian music, stuff that maybe nobody's heard in 30, 40, 50, any number of years. We wanted to incorporate some of the sounds from It Came From Canada into the Ruckus and kind of pay a little homage to all the great artists who came before the people we feature on the show. So let's go back to, I'm not even sure exactly when, because there is no date on the album, but this is from Edmonton, the Edmonton Tailgate Jazz Band, featuring Gwen Westcott on lead vocal. Here's a track from, I think, around 1960. This is Careless Love.
Careless love, love, oh love, careless love, love, oh love, careless love, look
And that was our little vinyl hunter moment. That was the Edmonton Tailgate Jazz Band and Careless Love from roughly 1960. I'm not entirely sure when it came out. If you'd like more information on that record, or about 400 others we've got listed, check out itcamefromcanada.com. Our next segment this time, we've got another new correspondent, Julia Vise. Julia, you chatted with the guys in Kids Eat Crayons.
I did. I chatted particularly with Dennis William Lee. He's the composer and sort of the main driving force behind Kids Eat Crayons.
These guys mix what one would think would pretty disparate, styles of music, right? You've got your jazz, you've got your heavy metal. Like, what's your take on their sound?
I'm kind of in awe of all of these guys. These are all very, very well-educated musicians who have gone to, some really good schools to hone their craft. But in terms of the experiment, I definitely hear a little Mr. Bungle in there. Anyone that likes Frank Zappa and likes people who experiment with sounds and who agree that any sound can be used in a composition. And if music needs something, like let's say the best jazz composition you come up with really, really needs some wailing guitar, right here, then that's what you're going to hear in this particular sound. And the same thing from the metal side of things. If you're writing a really, really good metal tune and it just isn't working, without a horn section, then go get the horn section. It's a really complex, really textured sound. It's incredible to listen to. Awesome live, by the way.
So I'm here talking to Dennis William Lee, who is the singer-songwriter in charge of Kids Eat Crayons.
Not singer, just songwriter. Mm-hmm.
So tell me a little bit about what happened before the first show. What happened to get it together?
I had an idea a long time ago. When I was in high school, really, I wanted to play metal and have a lot of jazz influence in it, but like genuine jazz influence, not sort of people think, you add extra notes to the chords and all of a sudden it's jazz. But okay. I wanted to, bring the influence of the artists I was really into at the time, like Charles Mingus and Thelonious Monk, and bring in the sort of compositional ideas as well as harmonic and melodic ideas into the aggressive style of metal. But I didn't have any, I didn't have the vocabulary for it back then. So I kind of came out to Montreal, went to McGill, studied
Always
jazz.
with this in the back of your mind?
Always with this in the back of my mind. This was in the back of my mind all 4 years of McGill. And I kind of tried in my last year to get it going, but I was too busy with school. And then at the end of my degree, when I finished at the same time as my friend Ben, who's the saxophone player in the band, we decided to do it. And I started writing music, and he started assembling musicians. And we found Scott Kingsley, who's sitting on the couch watching us right now. But yeah, so we went about assembling a team of gifted and talented musicians to start playing these compositions that I'd been working on for a long time. And Ben contributed one as well. And we worked together, workshopping the tunes to make them sort of a group thing rather than just, my charts played, read through, it's like we made it a group thing by everybody bringing, arrangement tweaks and solo ideas and, their own style of playing. And
so it did become collaborative at it.
It did become collaborative, definitely.
Let's talk about some of the other musicians then.
I'll start with myself since I know myself best. I played in a lot of rock and metal bands when I was young in high school, and then I went to school. I played drums in those bands and guitar and in a little bit, and I sang a little bit, and I played bass in one short-lived ska punk band called Speech Impediment. But yeah, Scott Kingsley's what's the word I'm looking for? Phenom. He's an electric bass phenom. He's amazing. And he came out from Nanaimo. Is that correct? Yeah.
Was it just for you, or was he here for other
No,
reasons?
he came from McGill. So we met a lot of these kids at McGill. So like I said, Ben was at McGill. Ben's got huge jazz background. He brings a lot of the real genuine jazz influence, as does David Rishpan, our keyboard player. Also plays in the Indigon Trio.
He does. Now, he wasn't the original keyboard player, is that right? Did he help compose some of the original music?
Yeah, he's not the original keyboard player, but he's been with us since before the record came out. So he didn't play the first show, but he played every show after that.
Okay.
Our original keyboard player was a guy named Brian Axford, who's living and studying and playing in New York right now. And I also knew Brian through McGill, and Ben and I played in a jazz quartet with him, so it's all this big, music community. Everything's interconnected.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's Dave Rishpan, who's very active in the scene, and there's Steve Reed, another saxophone player from Prince Edward Island, and Jean-Philippe Major, the singer extraordinaire, I actually first met JP. It's a funny story. He was wearing, not that funny, but he was wearing a Dream Theater t-shirt, and this was on, I think it was the first day of theory class, and I was like, hey, nice shirt. He's like, yeah, I love Dream Theater. I used to sing in a Dream Theater cover band. I said, really? We should jam sometime, and we jammed all through school.
Okay.
And so when it came time to start the band, I was like, there's only one choice for vocalist, really. It was...
So you didn't even consider anybody else?
No,
it was automatically...
it was all JP right from day one. Like, once I met him, and then once we played and I heard him sing, I was imagining him singing as I wrote these songs. Wow. Yes, and then there's Craig Sauvé, also of the NDP.
Oh, well known in the NDP.
Yeah. Craig Sauvé, he brings a lot of the genuine metal influence to the band, which is really good and really important because he's played in a lot of death metal bands. He grew up in Montreal, which has an amazing metal scene. And he also has studied classical composition at Concordia, and he also studied jazz guitar at, might have been Vanier. I think it was Vanier, yeah. So yeah,
he didn't actually have the McGill connection then?
So he wasn't the McGill connection. We met him through jazz jam sessions, I believe. He used to hang out at Grumpy's a lot, and as did Ben. So yeah, so Craig's a good example of the two styles mixing in one dude.
You touched on this a little bit when we were talking about JP, and I'm wondering about the actual compositions because they're amazing to listen to live and they're amazing to listen to on the album, but they're also very abstract. So talk a little bit about how you make that lyrical and accessible, even though it's very abstract music.
When I approached writing this album, I was thinking a lot of the style itself, bringing together a lot of different influences. And strangely enough, you won't necessarily see this on the album, but I listened to a lot of Ben Folds and Billy Joel and like really straight ahead songwriters. But I was also listening to a lot of Phantomus and Mr. Bungle and Frank Zappa and John Zorn and stuff like that at the time. So I was wanting to take, it's like when I listened to Phantomus, like their last album, Suspended Animation, it's stop and start and stop and start, and it's got cartoon music and it's got death metal, but it's compositionally, it makes sense. Like there's peaks and valleys, and it's musically cohesive, even if it's not song based. So I was wanting to do something like that with starts and stops and rapid shifts, but still have it be really song based. So really, if you look at it, most of the songs with the strange lyrics and whatever, they still have choruses and verses, even though they're interspersed and sort of broken up a lot. But it'll start in one place and it'll take you another. It'll have choruses, it'll have hooks. Like when I was putting together the songs, I would really think of like pop song structures, things that I would see in Ben Folds and Billy Joel, and then I would just sort of piece it together in a way that's more Phantomus-like.
Very nice. And so how far along are you in the next compositions?
I don't know. This is something that, this project for me is not something that I don't want to just shit it out. Pardon my French.
Yeah.
It's something that I want to, it sounds cliche, but I wait for inspiration to like really work on things. I'm always sort of working on little fragments musically and little fragments lyrically. And then I always find it's a long period of working slowly and doing not very much. And then it all comes together very quickly. And but in terms of what the band has been doing, the last bunch of rehearsals we have, as I was mentioning, been working on a lot of improvisational things, working on, not necessarily for the record itself, but we've been working on like full-on free improvisation.
Wow.
Like Ornette Coleman or early Steve Lacy styles. Just nobody's got anything to do except listen and play.
Do you find yourself, now that this is the second album, are you writing with these musicians in mind?
Yeah, definitely. That's something that also changed a lot. Because when I started writing the record, like I said, I knew Ben would be in the band, and I was imagining JP singing them. Writing for the musicians now.
Yeah.
Like knowing the way that Dave comps and knowing the way that Scott can play ridiculous slap bass stuff. Like there's no slap bass on the record except for like a small little section that we worked out together and You're All Dead to Me. Is that it? Is that the only? Yeah, that's the one section of slap bass. But sometimes at the shows he does some slap solos as an intro to something, and people go insane because it's amazing. So stuff like that, and Craig's death metal chops. Like Craig's got a vast knowledge of death metal that he's starting to lend me discs and show me guitar techniques and stuff, which is really, really cool. And so we want to work in a lot of that stuff. Yeah, so bringing together stuff like that.
So the album is called what?
The album is called Kids Eat Crayons is for Lovers.
And you can get it on kidseatcrayons.com for an MP3 download. So then we'll end off with Boil My Bones by Dennis William Lee, written for Kids Eat Crayons.
Yeah, Boil My Bones.
chewing her soul. Oh, my fate, take me whistling. Love me softly, lead me lost. I want a woman who will burn down my home when I'm feeling cold, and she will hollow me out, feed me famine and drought. Found my thoughts, you made me soft. Love me soft, leave me lost, swimming like guineas, sleep in my eyes, numb my know-how till I need it. Smoke it, right. Swimming like guineas, sleep in my eyes, numb my know-how, now I'm needed. Smoke me, I'm not alone until she comes, I'm not alone until she comes, I'm not alone until she comes, I'm not alone, I'm not alone, I'm not alone, I'm not alone until she comes, I'm not alone. Would you boil my bones? Found me so, leave me lost, cook me into
Yes, and that was Kids Eat Crayons, finishing off this episode of The Ruckus. I want to thank Julia again for chatting with Dennis about his band. Excellent sound. I love those guys. Go to kidseatcrayons.com. You'll hear more music, see what they're up to. Thanks again also to Natalie Salat for speaking with Mr. Barry Romberg, and thanks to my new buddy Ron Clark, who hooked me up with some music from the late great Dougie Richardson. I want to thank you all for listening. Once again, as I always say at the end of the show, if you have any comments, questions, criticisms, music, anything you might like to suggest or to let me know, go to CanadianRuckus.com. That's my blog. That's where I keep everybody up to date on what's going on with the show. I'm also on Facebook. I'm on MySpace. I've got all the links off the blog, so just go there and, get lost in the wonder that is the internet. Thanks again, everybody, for listening, and I hope to see you next time. We are going to have a very cool conversation with Mr. Michael Williams. People of a certain age will remember him as one of the original VJs on Much Music back in the 80s. Also, we are going to chat with Mr. Kevin Lynn next time. Now, you will remember him necessarily as one of the members of King Cobb Steely. He also played in Holy Fuck for a couple of years. Very talented bassist, very talented musician, and a heck of a cool guy. We'll be chatting with him too. Thanks for listening, folks, and we will see you in about a month.